One bullet, one night, the most powerful man in America, gone forever. He wasn't the only target. 3 men were marked to die that night. Welcome to amazing Basit, where history's deepest secrets are torn open, examined under the harshest light, and revealed in ways no one has dared before. Tonight, we go inside the greatest political murder of the modern world. Abraham Lincoln, the man who saved a nation, who freed 4 million enslaved souls, was murdered before he could finish what he started. And the question that haunts historians to this day: was John Wilkes Booth truly alone? Tonight, for the very first time, we reconstruct every minute of Lincoln's final night using newly uncovered documents, forensic science, and testimonies hidden in sealed government archives for over a century. The experiment begins now. John Wilkes Booth, the most famous actor in America, was handsome, charming, and absolutely consumed by hatred for Abraham Lincoln. But what transformed an actor into an assassin? The Civil War had just ended, but America was not healed. It was fractured, bleeding, and furious. In the South, men like Booth saw Lincoln not as a savior, but as a tyrant. Booth didn't act alone. In a boarding house on H Street, Washington, D.C., a group of conspirators met in secret, planning not 1 murder, but 3, on the very same night. The plan was audacious: assassinate President Lincoln, Vice President Andrew Johnson, and Secretary of State William Seward, all within minutes of each other. Decapitate the entire Union government in 1 stroke. On the morning of April 14th, Lincoln's aide handed him 2 theater tickets for that evening. Lincoln hesitated. He almost didn't go. That hesitation, that single moment of doubt, would cost him everything. Lincoln woke that morning having dreamed, for the 3rd time, of a ship sailing toward a dark and distant shore. He told his cabinet about the dream. "Something important is going to happen," he said. He was right. By noon, Booth had learned that Lincoln would attend Ford's Theater that evening. He had performed on that very stage hundreds of times. He knew every corridor, every exit, every shadow. The theater was his hunting ground. The weapon Booth chose was a Philadelphia Derringer, a single-shot pistol barely 6 inches long, devastating at close range, easy to conceal in a coat pocket, and on this night, loaded with a single .44 caliber ball. Mary Todd Lincoln didn't want to go that night. She had a headache. She was tired. She pleaded with her husband to stay home. Lincoln insisted. They had already told the newspapers they were attending. Appearances had to be maintained. Lincoln's assigned bodyguard that night, John Parker, abandoned his post outside the presidential box to watch the play from a better seat. And then he left to get a drink at the saloon next door. The most powerful man in America was left completely unguarded. Ford's Theater was packed. Over 1,700 people had come to see Our American Cousin. The audience laughed. The gaslights glowed warm gold, and in the presidential box above, Abraham Lincoln leaned back in his rocking chair and smiled. At 10:07 p.m., John Wilkes Booth walked through the front doors of Ford's Theater. He was recognized immediately. He was a celebrity. No one stopped him. No one questioned him. The stage was set. Booth slipped backstage and made his way up the stairs toward the presidential box. He had drilled a small peephole in the door days earlier to observe Lincoln's position. Now he put his eye to that hole and confirmed his target. At 10:14 p.m., the funniest line in the play was delivered on stage. The entire audience erupted in laughter, including Lincoln. It was the last time he would ever laugh. 3 seconds later, Booth pulled the trigger. The crack of the single-shot Derringer was muffled by the laughter. Most audience members thought it was part of the performance. But Mary Lincoln's scream, that scream cut through everything. Within seconds, the theater descended into absolute pandemonium. People screamed, climbed over each other, fainted. A man in the box grabbed Booth, who slashed him with a hunting knife and leaped to the stage below. When Booth leaped from the presidential box to the stage, 11 feet below, his spur caught in the patriotic bunting draped over the railing. He landed off balance and snapped his left fibula. He limped off stage into the night. Abraham Lincoln slumped forward in his chair, unconscious immediately. The bullet had entered behind his left ear and lodged behind his right eye. Doctors in the audience rushed to the box. There was nothing to be done. Lincoln was too tall for any theater stretcher. Soldiers carried him, diagonally, across 10th Street to the Peterson House boarding house opposite. They laid him in a small back bedroom on a bed too short for his 6'4" frame. Through the long night, as Lincoln lay dying, his entire cabinet gathered in that tiny boarding house room. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton stood at the bedside and wept. For 9 hours, America held its breath. Meanwhile, John Wilkes Booth galloped south on his horse through the dark Maryland countryside, broken leg and all. He had an escape plan, a network of Confederate sympathizers, and 12 days before justice would catch up with him. At the same moment as Lincoln's shooting, a conspirator named Lewis Powell broke into Secretary of State Seward's home and stabbed him 5 times in the face and neck. Seward survived. Barely. The coordinated attack had begun. Vice President Andrew Johnson was also marked for death that night. His assigned assassin, George Atzerodt, lost his nerve, got drunk at a hotel bar, and never carried out the attack. One act of cowardice changed American history. By midnight, Washington, D.C. was in full panic. Soldiers locked down the city. Rumors spread that the entire government was under attack. Secretary of War Stanton, believing it was a Confederate plot, shut down every road out of the capital. At 7:22 in the morning of April 15, 1865, Abraham Lincoln took his last breath. The doctors stepped back. The room went silent. Then Edwin Stanton spoke 9 words that would echo through eternity. Now he belongs to the ages. The largest manhunt in American history was launched within hours. 2,000 soldiers, detectives, and bounty hunters combed Maryland and Virginia. Booth had a 12-day head start and a well-laid escape route through Confederate territory. In the early hours of April 15th, Booth arrived at the home of Dr. Samuel Mudd, a Confederate sympathizer who had met Booth before. Mudd set Booth's broken leg, gave him food and shelter, and later claimed he didn't know who his patient was. History has debated that claim ever since. Back in Washington, detectives began making arrests within 24 hours. Booth's diary was found, his letters, his network. One by one, the conspirators were pulled from the shadows, revealing a plot far larger than one man's vendetta. Evidence emerged that Booth was in contact with Confederate Secret Service agents operating out of Montreal, Canada. The original plan was not assassination. It was kidnapping. Booth had planned to abduct Lincoln and hold him hostage to force a prisoner exchange. For 12 agonizing days, Booth and co-conspirator David Harold moved through Confederate sympathizer networks in Maryland and Virginia, hiding in barns, swamps, and safe houses. Booth's broken leg made every mile a torture. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton essentially became the most powerful man in America overnight. He controlled information, directed the investigation, and, some historians argue, may have wanted Lincoln's killer found quickly and quietly before certain connections could be examined. When Booth's diary was finally handed to Secretary Stanton, 18 pages had been torn out. To this day, no one knows who removed them or what they contained. Those missing pages remain one of the great mysteries of American history. On April 24th, Union cavalry finally tracked Booth to the Garrett tobacco farm in Virginia. Booth and Harold were hiding in a large hay barn. The soldiers surrounded it in the dark and demanded surrender. Harold surrendered. Booth refused. Standing on his broken leg in the burning barn, he reportedly called out, "Well, my brave boys, you may prepare a stretcher for me." John Wilkes Booth would not be taken alive. Sergeant Boston Corbett, acting against orders, fired his pistol through a gap in the barn boards. The bullet struck Booth in the neck, severing his spinal cord. He was dragged out of the burning barn onto the farmhouse porch, paralyzed. As dawn broke over the Garrett farm, Booth lay paralyzed on the porch, dying. He asked a soldier to lift his hands so he could look at them. He stared at them for a long moment. His last words were, "Useless, useless." 8 conspirators were put on trial before a military tribunal, not a civilian court. The decision was controversial then and remains so now. 4 were sentenced to death, 4 to prison. The trial lasted just 6 weeks. On July 7, 1865, 4 conspirators were hanged simultaneously in the yard of Washington Arsenal Prison. Mary Surratt became the first woman ever executed by the United States government. Thousands watched. History recorded every face. Lincoln's funeral train traveled 1,654 miles across America over 13 days. In every city, in every town, millions lined the tracks to watch the black-draped locomotive pass. Freed slaves walked barefoot in the cold to pay their respects. America had never mourned like this before. Without Lincoln's moderate voice, Reconstruction became brutal. The South was occupied. Racial terror escalated. Some historians argued that Lincoln's assassination was not just a murder. It was the murder of the possibility of a more just America. In 1992, a team of forensic scientists was finally granted access to examine Lincoln's preserved remains and bullet fragments held at the National Museum of Health. What they found challenged the official account in ways that are still being debated. Lincoln likely suffered from MFS, Marfan syndrome, a genetic connective tissue disorder that affected his height, his hands, and his vision. Some researchers believe it may have affected his heart as well. Had he lived, Lincoln might have died within years anyway, of natural causes. Edwin Stanton has been cast in history as both a hero, who kept the government functioning in its darkest hour, and as a possible co-conspirator who had motive to want Lincoln removed. The torn diary pages have never stopped pointing in his direction. In 1865, before Booth's body was released to his family, the government removed 2 vertebrae from his neck as evidence. Those bones sat in the National Museum of Health for over 150 years, and in 1994, they were used in a DNA analysis that confirmed the body was Booth's. To this day, serious historians debate whether Booth acted under orders from the Confederate government in Richmond, whether the Catholic Church was involved, and whether Stanton orchestrated a cover-up. The official story has never fully satisfied everyone. Declassified State Department files, opened in the 1990s, confirmed that Confederate Secret Service operations in Canada were directly funding Booth's original kidnapping plot. The assassination may have evolved from an officially sanctioned Confederate operation. Mary Todd Lincoln never recovered. She spent the night of the assassination in the room with Lincoln's body until dawn. She wore black for the rest of her life. She was eventually committed to a psychiatric hospital by her own son and fought her way out. She died broken in 1882. Ford's Theater still stands on 10th Street in Washington, D.C., restored to its 1865 appearance. Lincoln's presidential box is preserved exactly as it was on the night of April 14th. The rocking chair still sits there. Millions visit every year, standing in the shadow of that doorway. On Lincoln's desk in the White House, when he left for the theater that night, lay an unopened letter. It was from a young boy in Ohio who had read about the president's recurring nightmares and wanted to tell him not to be afraid. That letter sat on the desk for 3 days before anyone could bear to move it. Booth left a letter, published in newspapers, explaining his act. He called himself a patriot. He believed Lincoln was a dictator destroying the republic. He believed history would vindicate him. It did not. He is remembered only as the man who stole Lincoln from America. In 2023, researchers at the Armed Forces DNA Identification Laboratory completed the most sophisticated genetic analysis ever performed on Lincoln assassination evidence. Using hair samples preserved since 1865, they reconstructed genetic profiles that confirmed key identities and opened new questions about who else may have been present that night. Here is what 160 years of evidence, science, and scholarship has confirmed. John Wilkes Booth fired the shot. He was supported by a conspiracy funded by Confederate intelligence, and the full truth of who authorized, who covered up, and what was in those torn diary pages remains open. Lincoln had dreamed of reconciliation, a South welcomed back without punishment, a nation healed, and formerly enslaved people integrated into American life with dignity. That dream died with him on April 15th. America is still, in many ways, trying to finish what he started. In the reconstructed presidential box at Ford's Theater, Lincoln's rocking chair sits in its place, never occupied since that night. Sometimes, visitors say, on quiet evenings, they swear they can hear the creak of its wood. Whether that is memory, or grief, or something beyond our understanding, perhaps we are not meant to know. Abraham Lincoln gave America its most essential truth, that a nation built on contradiction could still reach, however painfully, however slowly, toward its better self. They took him before he could see it happen, but the reaching never stopped. It never stopped. If this journey through history moved you, if it made you see the past differently, then subscribe to Amazing Basit. Because history isn't over. The next secret is waiting.